This episode of the Device Talks Weekly podcast is brought to you by our Device Talks Tuesdays virtual series. Join us this Tuesday at 4 p.m. to hear how to take the risk out of your medical device supply chain. This presentation will be brought to you by Quasar. Go to devicetalks.com to register. All right, you ready for this?
Ready.
Hey everyone, this is Tom Salemi. Welcome back to the Device Talks Weekly podcast. Pleased to be here with my podcast partner. Wait, this is not Chris Newmarker. This is Sean Whooley, the assistant editor of Mass Device. Sean, welcome back to the podcast.
Thank you very much. Excited to be back. Like I said, a little nervous to fill Chris's shoes, but we'll give it a go.
Well, you crushed it last time, and I'll let everyone on the podcast on a little bit of insight. Sean and I are both raised from the North Shore of Boston, so there's a pretty good chance that we'll slip into some smart pot conversations at some point during the podcast. Do you think you can manage that, Sean?
I think I would very much appreciate that.
I'm sure we can do as bad a Boston accents as John Krasinski and Chris Evans, so we'll give it our best. But
maybe even worse.
All right, well, without Chris Newmarker here, we had to call upon Sean to pull together this week's, we'll still call it Newmarker's Newsmakers. Sean, is that what you want to do, or do you want your own list?
I think we'll pay homage to Chris by keeping his name.
I don't know. I think Whooley's Wonders or something. Hashtag? No, okay. We'll go with Newmarker's Newsmakers. So
let me get to 5 appearances before we start thinking about changing things up.
I think that's in your contract, right? Is that when that kicks in? Yeah, exactly.
Incentives and all that, yeah.
That and the taking out all the brown M&Ms from the green room. So, all right. Well, what is the 5th most read article on Mass Device this week?
Number 5 is Abbott wins emergency use authorization for its Advise DX SARS-CoV-2 IgM antibody test. It is, the company said, the 7th test to receive EUA from the FDA throughout the pandemic. So they've definitely been among the leaders in getting the tests out. And this one runs on its Architect and Alinity platforms and detects antibodies in response to the virus. And that way, people who would test positive for antibodies they know about a recent or prior infection, and potentially having those antibodies could mean, protection against the disease itself, although there's still kind of more to be learned about that.
That's great. Well, as we've said in the past, you can't have too many of these tests, not these days anyways. So good number 5. What is number 4 on the Newmarker's Newsmakers list?
Number 4 is the U.S. Supreme Court is going to hear a challenge in the Arthrex Smith & Nephew patent spat. There's a 2019 appeals court ruling in the spat between the two companies, and the appeals court judges had found that the Patent Trial and Appeal Board judges were unconstitutionally appointed, and that is now being heard in the Supreme Court.
That's great. No, and it's topical too with the Supreme Court. And I actually, after seeing this, I wanted to delve a little deeper into the spat between Arthrex and Smith & Nephew, and it goes back to 2004. If someone wants to go through Mass Device and find all the links to the articles, this has been going on for a bit. But I was a little unsure as to where this latest chapter fit into the entire story. So this is perfect timing. And honest to God, listeners, when I booked this interview, I had no idea that this would be number 4. I just thought it was really interesting. But we did talk with Michael Jakes. Michael's a partner at Finnegan. He's in DC, and he's going to sort of walk us through what the Supreme Court will actually be looking at, what it will be deciding, and what the impact might be on medtech. It has the potential to be a really huge impact on medtech. And if it decides one way or the other, it could really slow things down. So let's hear from Michael Jakes. He's a partner at Finnegan in Washington, D.C. This opening keynote interview is brought to you by Mass Device and Medical Design and Outsourcing. For the latest trends and news in medical device making, manufacturing, and investment, go to massdevice.com and medicaldesign and outsourcing.com. Well, Mike Jakes, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
So, Mike, I've made a career of not really knowing what I'm talking about and finding people who have answers to things I don't quite understand. And this is one of those instances where I desperately need help. We're talking about the decision of the Supreme Court to take up the Arthrex Smith and Nephew ongoing case. And they're talking about something very specifically. So before I embarrass myself by trying to explain what the Supreme Court will be reviewing, I will ask you, Mike, what exactly is going on here? What will the Supreme Court be reviewing, or what did they agree to review in the case between Arthrex and Smith and Nephew?
Yeah, it's an interesting question that doesn't come up that often, and it's a constitutional question, which is why the Supreme Court took it. And the question simply is, the judges on the Patent and Trial and Appeal Board, were they constitutionally appointed in accordance with the Appointments Clause, which is in Article 2 of the Constitution? And if they weren't, that invalidates their decisions for the last couple of years.
So were these particular judges appointed any differently than judges have been appointed in the past?
Well, see, they're not judges like Article 3 judges in the courts.
Okay.
Administrative patent judges. And the Patent Office has a particular structure, and there are about 200 of them in the Patent Office. And they hear appeals in the Patent Office. They hear inter-party review, where they review the validity of the patents. And so, there are lots of administrative judges throughout our system, whether they're in Social Security, and there are lots of them. But this particular structure is set up in the Patent Office, is called into question because under the Appointments Clause, the president appoints officers of the United States, and then the Congress can give the president or heads of departments the authority to appoint inferior officers. Mm-hmm. So these judges, are they what they call principal officers? Are they inferior officers? And that's a fairly esoteric constitutional question, which is, it's unusual that it comes up in the Patent Office, but it's about government structure. It's civics.
Did this administrator appoint them differently than past administrators have done it? Is this a question of the entire process that we've had in place, or is this really a question about these particular individuals because they were appointed in a particularly different way?
It's more about the Patent Office, but it has implications across government, which is why the Supreme Court's interested. Because if they did it wrong here, it comes up every once in a while. It came up in the Coast Guard, it came up with a copyright royalty tribunal. It comes up every once in a while. And so here, the judges are appointed by the Secretary of Commerce. And so if they're inferior officers, that's fine. If they're principal officers, then they have to be appointed by the president and be confirmed by the Senate, kind of like the confirmation hearings we're seeing now. Probably not as extensive for an administrative judge.
So has this sort of challenge been brought up in the past, or perhaps it must be if it's been brought up to the Supreme Court? Yeah. How has this challenge? How has this issue been raised in the past, and how has it been decided?
Yeah, it comes up in different contexts, really depending on the structure of that particular agency. As I mentioned, it's come up in the Coast Guard with the Copyright Royalty Tribunal, and I have to say that the Patent Office is set up. I'm not sure any other administrative agencies are set up the same way. It's a kind of a unique organizational structure where you have the direct, and then you have a semi-independent board of APJs, of administrative patent judges. So that's why I say it doesn't come up that often, because usually when Congress sets up a structure like this, there aren't any questions. But every once in a while, the Appointments Clause pops up.
So what is at stake here? Could the broader impact for medtech and for other patent holders be based upon this decision, or how the Supremes decide?
Well, there are really two contexts. One is the broader question about just government and administrative agencies. But people like me, we focus on the patent law aspects of it and what happened to these patent cases that are going through the Patent Trial and Appeal Board. The board hears a lot of cases. I mean, it's been used extensively and it's invalidated a lot of patents. And it's become really an important part of all patent litigation. And so take this case, for example, there's an Arthrex patent. It's on knotless suture securing assembly. That's the title of it. And so Smith and Nephew filed for review of this patent to have it declared invalid, and they were successful. If the board members were unconstitutionally appointed, then that has to be done over, and Congress has to fix it. Mm-hmm. That's really the question. And so up until the Federal Circuit's decision, which was about a year ago, there were about 100 or so decisions that were vacated and sent back to be redone. And those cases are just sitting there in limbo at the board, waiting for what the Supreme Court will do, and they'll sit there for a while longer. The second question is, since that time, the board's been continuing to hand down decisions that judges have, and so the question then is, what about those decisions since that time? Now, the Court of Appeals said we can fix this problem by removing the protections for the judges. They had protection so they could be fired only for cause. Mm-hmm. And the court said, we'll take that away, and then everything's fine. That's the second question in front of the Supreme Court. And if the Supreme Court says, no, that fix didn't work, then it puts a whole bunch of other decisions into question. And it could hobble this process for a while until Congress fixes it. That's really what's at stake. And because this Patent Trial and Appeal Board has become such an important part of challenging patents, it would turn the system on its head for at least a few years until it's fixed.
So, we all like to make fun of Congress and its inability to pass things, but is this the sort of fix that maybe is done quickly? If it is decided that this needs to be fixed by Congress, is there going to involve some sort of wrangling? Do you think this would be something complicated, or is it kind of a slam dunk?
Well, at the risk of ever predicting what Congress might do, I will say that this is not an overly political fight, and it's something that should be able to be fixed, mm-hmm. really depending on what kind of protections and oversight they would give to the director of the patent office over the board members. I don't think they're going to go through Senate confirmation for all 200 judges. I don't think that's realistic. So it's really, how would they change the structure and the operating of the Patent Trial and Appeal Board? Now, there is some difference of opinion. Some people think they should be totally independent. Some people think that the director should be able to exercise control over them. I think that it could be something that Congress could deal with relatively easily. Mm-hmm. But there's a lot of things on Congress's plate, too. This might not be the most important one.
And this is, again, this would impact patents overall, not just the medtech industry, which I think that would be an important issue, right? This would be something that certainly would hamper our innovative economy if it's not fixed properly.
It would. Now, generally, a lot of patent owners have not liked this Patent Trial and Appeal Board, which was set up in 2012.
Okay.
There is some disagreement on whether it's been effective, with a lot of big tech companies liking the Patent Trial and Appeal Board because then they've been able to successfully challenge patents. In general, a lot of medical device companies depend on their patents very heavily, and so some of them have not been that enamored with the Patent Trial and Appeal Board.
Well, this is
a lot of patents.
Now this gets interesting, and I should have asked that. So 2012, this was created. What was the process before that? What was it trying to fix?
Sure, it was intended to fix a couple of things. One was there was a certain view that there were a lot of bad patents floating around out there, mm-hmm. and this would give the patent office a second chance to look at those and invalidate them. It was also intended to be a cheaper alternative to litigation. Before that, if a company got sued, it could challenge the validity of the patent. And it can still do that, but this is a different avenue. It's generally cheaper than going through full-blown trial and litigation to invalidate a patent. Mm-hmm. Early on, there were some people that called it the patent death squad.
That's a T-shirt right there, Mike.
Yeah. Whether or not that was true, there were some people who really didn't like it because the invalidation rate was really high at the beginning. It has leveled out since then. Mm-hmm. But, the divide split along the lines of those people who like patents and really depend heavily on them, which includes a lot of medical device companies and other companies that get sued a lot on patents that like this avenue as a way to cheaply and relatively easily challenge patents without having to go through a litigation in a district court and face a jury, for example.
So do we have a sense as to when this might be argued before? I assume there will be arguments before the Supreme Court. Is there timing on this at all, or are we too early to say that?
No, we can guess when it will be. It hasn't been set yet. The briefs will be filed over the next few months, and it will probably be February or March, the argument. Mm-hmm. The way things are currently set up, and then a decision before the end of the term, which usually ends in June.
So what happens over the next, until we have that decision? Are things just in the holding pattern?
That's exactly right. That's a big impact because of first of all, these cases that got sent back to the patent office. There were about 100 of them that were on appeal that got sent back to be redone with a different constitutionally appointed panel. The board, the Patent Trial and Appeal Board, has put those on hold while this question was pending at the Supreme Court. And so those will wait. And since last October, there have been another bunch of decisions, many of which are on appeal or being appealed. And I'm not sure what's going to happen with those. The Court of Appeals could wait to decide those to see what the Supreme Court does. So we could end up with a pretty good backlog of these cases from the patent office.
At what point is the PTAB brought in to make these decisions?
So, well, in this particular case, Arthrex's patent was challenged by Smith and Nephew. They filed a petition in front of the PTAB, and there's a procedure where they go through and have a hearing and introduce evidence to challenge the patent. It's going on every day. There are hundreds of those cases.
But I'm putting together the timeline of Smith and Nephew and Arthrex. I go back to 2004. This fight's been going on for a while, it seems. Is this directly related to that patent that they've been fighting over since 2004, or is this a completely new battle that has just been a new chapter to this saga?
I believe it's a new chapter.
Okay.
There have been lots of skirmishes over the years, and this is just the latest one.
I gotcha. So in this case, then, there was a challenge to a patent, and that challenge went directly to PTAB. It didn't have to involve a decade and a half of litigation before getting to PTAB. It's a completely different subject.
That's right.
Interesting.
And in fact, once if someone's sued on a patent, they only have a year to go to the PTAB.
Okay.
So it relate back to that 2004 case.
So if someone is sued on a patent now, that clock will still be ticking even though the Supreme Court is reviewing this, or is there some kind of?
No, I believe the clock will still be ticking because that's a statute. I can't say what will happen to it. As I said, this goes on every day. These cases, they keep churning through the system.
Interesting. How often, going to the Supreme Court, which has been in the news lately, how often does the Supreme Court review a case like this that could have such an impact on the medtech industry specifically?
So I'd put those into two categories. They're the more IP specific cases, and this court maybe takes a couple of those a year, which they have over the last few years. And those can have a fair amount of impact, depending on really what's at stake. I look back to the eBay case, which dealt with injunctions, and that had a huge impact on all patents, but particularly on the medtech industry. And so they do a couple cases a year. Some have wider impact than others. This one's a little different because it goes beyond patent law. And so when this issue came up, many people, including myself, we looked at it and said, yeah, looks like a Supreme Court case, because although it's patent specific and all the patent lawyers are going to be interested in it, it goes beyond that to just how government is set up and agencies are set up. And the Supreme Court loves that stuff.
I'm sure they do. Has a lot of attention has been paid to the ideological shifts of the Supreme Court in ways not directly related to medtech. But has there been a shift with all the new justices coming on? Is it seen as being any more or less patent friendly or IP friendly, or steering one way or the other with over the last 5 years or so?
Well, it's I can't. They don't have enough cases probably to draw a straight line and say it's patent unfriendly. Cases go both ways. There's one area which has been of concern for a lot of people, and that's in patent eligibility, whether something can actually be eligible for a patent or whether it's an abstract idea or relies on a law of nature. This area of the law, the Supreme Court weighed in several cases over the last 10 years, including the In re Bilski case, which is the one I argued in 2009. Yeah, it's been 10 years. That kind of started this. And they've generally been hostile to patent eligibility and what things can be patented. But it's spilled over because it's spilled over in computer software, diagnostic methods. The medical device industry was fairly distant from it, but now it's creeping into that as well, especially when you have things like software as a medical device, all the health and fitness devices that are available that depend on software. Those patents are being challenged all the time. And this, over the last year, the judges on the Court of Appeals, as well as numerous petitions, have begged the Supreme Court to do something about this area of the law, and they have steadfastly said no. So that one looks like it would take a congressional fix, at least at this point. And patents don't always get the most attention.
What would be the fix that they would like to see? Just sort of a clarification on what could be patented, or?
That's right.
Yeah.
What is patent eligible? What is an abstract idea? There's very little clarity right now, and patents get invalidated regularly on those grounds. Things that 10 or 20 years ago no one would have questioned.
And that circles back again to the PTAB. That were they the ones who would do the invalidation of at least some of those patents, correct?
They did some. That's not their main focus. The PTAB had the ability to examine business method patents for the last 8 years. That was part of the America Invents Act when it was set up. And that was a special provision that allowed them to look at covered business methods. Generally, that didn't affect the medtech industry. It was more financial institutions and the financial patents. That was an 8-year experiment that has sunsetted. There's some talk about bringing it back.
Interesting. Wow, this is going to be interesting to watch. I mean, this really it kind of snuck under the radar, but it sounds as if this could have a really wide impact on the medtech industry.
Well, it could greatly upset the apple cart on patent law, depending on what they do. Since the medical device companies so much depend on their patents, they watch this very closely.
And final question: what was it like arguing a case in front of the Supreme Court in 2009? Was it a thrill?
It was a thrill. It was great. I didn't win. As one of my partners said, when they ask you, how did you do? I said, well, I lost 9-0. And they asked, why did that happen? Well, there were only 9 of them. So.
At least you came in second.
Some people didn't consider it so much of a loss because it did clarify the law, but it sort of started us down this path on patent eligibility that has led us to where we are today. It's a fantastic experience for any lawyer. I do a lot of arguments in the Court of Appeals, but to the Supreme Court is a kind of a career thing for people like me.
That's very cool. Excellent, Mike. Well, thank you for providing some clarity on a cloudy situation, and thanks for joining us on the podcast.
Yeah, it's great talking to you.
All right. Well, it was great to hear from Michael Jakes of Finnegan on that one, and provided some clarity to what is a really kind of for me anyway, confusing issue. But I'm sure it's one that we're all going to be hearing about going forward, and just goes to show the importance of the Supreme Court. Like we needed to be reminded of that these days. But all right, Sean, lay number 3 on us. What's the third most read article on mass device of this week?
Number 3 is the FDA clears GE Healthcare's AI-powered cardiovascular ultrasound system. It's 510K clearance for the Ultra Edition package on its Vivid cardiovascular ultrasound systems. New features essentially that are based on AI, and they're supposed to allow clinicians to acquire faster, more repeatable exams on a consistent basis. I think it's just AI, I think, always garners a little bit of interest, and this is just another kind of advancement in the technology.
Definitely continuing to see more and more of it mentioned. I know it was brought up on it's one of the partnerships that Medtronic had put together, and it certainly seems to be making the list on a routine basis. So that's a super solid number 3. All right, let's start to bring it home. What is the second most read article on Mass Device this week?
This is where it gets top heavy towards Medtronic.
Here we go again. Medtronic making news.
Number 2, Medtronic launches a head-to-head TAVR TAVR study against Edwards. They'll be conducting a randomized head-to-head study comparing their transcatheter aortic valve replacement, or TAVR systems, in patients with symptomatic aortic stenosis, primarily women. The trial is comparing Medtronic's Evolut Pro and Pro Plus systems against Edwards' balloon expandable Sapien 3 and Sapien 3 Ultra transcatheter heart valves. So 2 of the kind of titans of TAVR, I guess, going at it.
Look at you with the alliteration and the headline writing. Titans of TAVR. I like it.
I'm starting to become a podcaster.
Clash of the TAVR Titans. Let's copyright that one before someone steals it. All right. Well, that's a great number 2. All right. That was mentioned during Medtronic's Analyst Day, which was really, I thought, I know you sat through the whole thing. I haven't seen all the presentations by the division leaders, but what did you think about the Analyst Day, Investor Day video extravaganza?
It was, from Medtronic's perspective, quite optimistic. I think the CEO, Jeff Martha, I think he even said in response to one of the analyst questions, he said because it's virtual, he can't quite tell the reaction he's getting, but on his side of the camera, it felt very positive, and they're going all out. As they said, they're going on the offensive. So they were definitely not hiding that. I guess in their presentations, they were showing all the plans they have and their restructuring and all that. They're excited about what's to come.
Yeah, so that was a great catch too by you on that call. I remember that answer, and it's true, when you're kind of speaking to a microphone into a computer or a camera, you don't know what the response is, and if people are feeling the energy that you're trying to deliver, and clearly the analyst picked up on the very confident tone that Jeff Martha and the executive team was putting forth. So, and I really liked the way they presented. I hope more companies kind of do that with video and audio presentations. I think it's a lot more comprehensive and a lot more easy to grasp, at least for me, than just a straight phone call. So good for them for putting it together, or I guess for an in-person meeting. If we're not going to go back to in-person meetings anytime soon, I hope more companies do their analyst days this way, because I think it benefits everybody. All right, so this is the big one, the big number 1. And it was written by some scrappy upstart on the Mass Device editorial team, wasn't it?
It was Mass Device's scrappy upstart editorial team member and scrappy upstart podcaster.
What did you write, Sean Whooley?
It was, number 1 is a headline: Medtronic CEO Jeff Martha says it's time to be bold and add grit. It's related to the company's investor day that we just talked about, where Martha, as I said, talked about their kind of plans for a new Medtronic. They talked about their restructuring plans, which they expect to save them anywhere from $450 million to $475 million by 2023. And yeah, Martha basically said they want to be bold and add grit into the organization, and that should lead to accelerated growth, which would create a lot of value for the company's shareholders. And this was all part of their presentations, in which they shared plenty of news, including the number 2 new, article that we just talked about with the TAVR, the news about surgical robotics, diabetes, and all sorts of things. And
that was written by our colleague, Nancy Crotty. So yeah, no, Medtronic topped the list again. And I was able to circle back with Kayla Crum. Kayla's a managing director at Truist Securities. We talked after Medtronic's last analyst call, which was also done on video. And this was sort of a part, I guess, the second part of their video presentation. And if you can't catch the full presentation, I do recommend you check out Sean's story on Mass Device. He did a great job with the write-up. It was very comprehensive, and you can find that on massdevice.com. And of course, let's listen to Kayla Crum, Managing Director at Truist Securities, for her take on the conversation. This closing keynote conversation is brought to you by Device Talks Tuesdays on-demand sessions. Go to devicetalks.com to register for these free, informative conversations led by 3M, Locus Robotics, Avail Med Systems, and many more. Go to devicetalks.com. Well, Kayla Crum, welcome back to the podcast.
It's great to be back. Thanks for having me.
I feel like we should be calling you our Medtronic correspondent or something. This is the second time you've been on following one of their calls, but they've both been so super interesting. I think they were definitely worthy of follow-up. What did you think, first of all, of Analyst Day, the way that Medtronic laid it out this week? It was really well done and really sharp with the videos. And I'll admit I probably tapped my toes a little bit when they were playing their little theme music there and running some graphics.
I mean, what a unique format, right? And I think the company pulled it off pretty seamlessly. You know, there really is like an energy that just feels very different there as compared to prior years. So yeah, it was really great to see.
Now, I was curious, you're looking at this probably definitely through a different lens than I am. You're looking for data. You're looking for data points. At the end of the day, when all the flashing lights are done, did you feel like you got all the substance you did from a typical kind of call? All the material, all the numbers you need, all the guidance from the company?
After 5-7 hours of an analyst day, it was a lot of content. But I do think that the company had a lot to talk about, and you have this large, $30 billion revenue company, and I think that Jeff, this is really his first time, stepping in and framing up the business. So yes, I think it was a really good and productive meeting.
So let's get right into it. It was, again, when we talked last, there was discussion about Medtronic being nimble and moving quicker, and that sounds great. And it's something that companies, I think, will say. But yesterday, they really kind of laid out their plan. They're going to turn a $30 billion company into $21.5 billion companies, whatever the math was. And they had a slide identifying each of the little individual business units that would be running under the Medtronic name. It was very explicit. It was very detailed, and in the call, Jeff sort of got into the details as to how they came together. What do you think of the way they've laid out? Do you see this working effectively, having so many different entities, working under the Medtronic name?
You kind of hit on it spot on. You have this large, $30 billion revenue company. And as we see with a lot of companies, as they scale, it gets harder to grow, and, things get more bureaucratic. And so innovation slows. And so the goal, with decentralization is really to empower their business leaders and push decision-making and that tactical strategy downward. And I mean, essentially those business units can then operate like small companies under the Medtronic umbrella. And so there was also, a change in terms of incentivizing these leaders on growth and market share goals. And remember, I mean, Jeff did all of this in the RTG business. I mean, he turned around that segment with this strategy. So now it's just taking those building blocks and doing it company-wide.
And that was your question, which I thought was a good one. Just, was RTG really a model? And Jeff Martha kind of demurred a bit and said, "Well, we've got smarter people in the room now. That might have been an inspiration, but this is more than that." But tracking what they were able to do with RTG, is there a more direct parallel than Jeff Martha was willing to say? And if there is, what does that parallel say about the path forward for Medtronic?
No, I do think that RTG is a good one. It was a business that, for years had some volatility in performance, and, categories within RTG like, spine. It was a market that Medtronic has owned and yet has really kind of had taken a step back in terms of innovation, and all of these small companies kind of stepped up and competed really effectively against them. And so, I think that what we're seeing now is Jeff is trying to basically push decision making across the organization, pushing it downward. And that will give, him and the executive team more time to focus on just the big picture and driving that mid-single digit growth across the business.
Does that generally, in your opinion, work? Giving more authority to the people down below, does it, obviously it creates opportunities for disconnect between upper management and lower upper management. I guess looking at across the industry, maybe across other companies, how does that typically play out?
Yeah, we've seen other medtech companies implement this strategy and do it effectively. So I think that the plan makes a lot of sense. You look at companies like Stryker and Boston Scientific that, to be fair, there are differences in terms of the end markets that Medtronic plays in versus some of the other companies. But the growth rates are pretty different. And so, I think that the argument that Jeff had stated at the end of the call was, essentially they have to grow or should be growing at least in line with their end markets in that mid-single digit range. And again, if they implement this strategy right, in my opinion, they can grow faster than that. So I think that's the goal going forward.
That's great. And one thing that I thought was interesting was, when Jeff Martha came on and he was pushing for all these changes, it was kind of surprising given that he was so close with Omar Ishrak that it essentially would say we need to do things differently than we've been doing before. We talked about this the last time, but in the call, he mentioned that some of this at least is inspired from the pandemic and their realization that they can function just as well separately, or they can function well separately rather than being together all the time, making joint decisions all the time. I thought that was a really interesting statement.
No, I agree. And you can tell, through these challenging times, the companies that are coming together and investing in their business, and as Medtronic has, even with its sales team, stepping up and making sure that the folks are compensated during this challenging time. That really brings together a company and the culture through a difficult time.
And we are seeing, you mentioned Stryker is another company that has mentioned changes from the pandemic. Are you hearing this from others on the call that, hey, we've learned that we're able to do things a bit differently and we're making adjustments because of how we've had to operate the past 6 months?
Yes, absolutely. Across our companies, all of our companies have had to adjust, to innovate how they're connecting with their customers. Surgeons, there are surgeons who wouldn't allow their sales reps into an operating room, which is pretty typical in a lot of procedures. And so they have had to get creative, both in building markets and also in communicating internally. Two
more things. One is culture. I thought Jeff spoke directly to how they're cultivating this new culture, the enthusiasm, the confidence, the grit they're looking for. And he also sounded like he was going to hold people accountable. And I think you alluded to this earlier where he said you can make your numbers, but if you don't make your growth numbers, then we have to have a conversation. And he also at some point said if people aren't able to follow along with this philosophy, that he even used the word cancer, which is a strong word to use. Were you surprised by sort of the directness to the workforce as to what he's expecting from Medtronic personnel?
I think it's definitely puts higher expectations on those business leaders, and it pushes those business leaders to really look and understand the markets that they go after. And I think if the company is allowed to and can act as sort of, again, 20 different smaller companies with that focus, with those insights into the competitive dynamics, the company is going to be able to accelerate growth, in my opinion.
Yeah, that's a great point. And you're right. If you're going to have these disparate organizations sort of operating on one, if you have those numbers to adhere to, that really kind of, what your expectations are. So there's there's less opportunity for miscommunication.
No, people follow incentives. Exactly.
Final question or final point. I'm continuing to love the partnerships, the outside partnerships. We had the one Blackstone that we talked about. Now they talked about the Half Moon and the Foundry who they're working with on mitral valve. It is, Jeff suggested this, that it's very much a pharma model. What do you think of these partnerships with outside groups? How does that fit into Medtronic today? And do you see a future for more of these?
Yeah, both of these are super cool. Medtronic plays in the gastrointestinal market today, and they've been focused on improving a lot of the dynamics in that market and in colon cancer diagnostics. they developed this product called the PillCam Genius, which they talked about. It's essentially a swallowable colonoscopy. And they mentioned that, they're going to partner with Amazon to bring it to market, and that'll allow basically Medtronic to leverage the Amazon delivery network, their customer base. There's a lot of creativity around that partnership that should allow them to disrupt the market. And then, with the Foundry, which is a medical device incubator company, they entered into this partnership to develop a transcatheter mitral repair technology. And it's also just a really creative way to extend their R&D capabilities, and it allows Medtronic to make, structured investments over time, and ultimately potentially acquire that company. So, both of these are really creative solutions. And I do think that, you're not going to see these kind of typical kind of acquisitions or deals. You may see more and more of these structured, interesting partnerships, which I think is really creative on the company's part.
And I completely forgot to mention the Amazon connection. Can you give us a little more information on the plan for the pill and why they'd be working through Amazon? It sounds like a great way to go directly to consumer.
Yeah, it's very different. They did develop the PillCam Genius. Basically it's an at-home treatment or swallowable colonoscopy. And they're trying to address the fact that a lot of patients, in a lot of cases, avoid screening for colon cancer for a lot of different reasons. So there is a lot of creativity around this partnership. And the pivotal trial for this product, it's expected to start in fiscal 2022. They're expecting to potentially, submit in fiscal 2023. So, it's not too far away. Mm-hmm. But again, these are really interesting strategies.
That's great. And the Foundry was an interesting point as well. And I love the sort of callback, because the Foundry was the company that created Ardian, which was mentioned several times throughout the program as well. So it's great to see those two companies working so closely together. Well, it was a great call. Appreciate your taking a few minutes and sharing some insights on where Medtronic is going. And it's great to have you on the podcast.
Of course. Yes, of course. Anytime, Tom. It was great to catch up with you.
All right, it was great to have Kayla Crum back on the podcast. I'm sure we'll have her on again to talk about many companies in medtech. All right, and that's a wrap for this episode. Sean Whooley did a great job filling in for the man, Chris Newmarker. You, I believe, are also finding your way onto social media land. So how can people find you on LinkedIn?
You can connect with me at Sean Whooley, SeanWhooley, on LinkedIn. I'm welcoming all connections, trying to grow my network as wide as possible. And then I'm also on Twitter. You can follow me at Sean, SeanWhooley, That is my Twitter handle. Feel free to shoot me a follow there. I'm still kind of working my way into getting posts up on my accounts there, but we'll get there.
Well, Sean's writing some great stuff for Mass Device, so I definitely advise people to connect with him on LinkedIn and Twitter. And I don't know, are you on the gram? What else are you kids on these days? Are you TikToking, Sean?
I am not TikToking, but if I get enough, if people want me to start TikToking, maybe get some medtech devices to try at home and do some TikToks with them.
There we go. We'll do an unboxing of a titanium hip implant. Anyway, all right, I'll stop being an idiot, and I'll tell everyone they can find me on LinkedIn. I am Tom Salemi. I'm also on Twitter at MedTechTom, and it would be great to connect with you there. If you would be so kind as to share the details of this podcast on your own social media connections. Let folks know that we're putting together the Device Talks Weekly podcast every week and bringing you, I hope, great insights and great interviews from the leaders in medtech. If you do share this podcast, please do tag Sean and Chris and myself. We'd love to be part of these conversations. And finally, please do subscribe. We post this every Friday on our channels. It goes out to our subscribers on Friday. We'll then put it up on Mass Device and MDO in the days that follow. But if you really want to be one of the first people to hear this, or at least have that opportunity, the best thing to do is subscribe. So go on your podcast player, push the subscribe button, and you'll get this podcast delivered directly to you. So, all right, well, that's a wrap. Sean Whooley, great job today filling in for Chris Newmarker.
Thank you very much, Tom. Appreciate it.
And we went through an entire episode without doing one crappy Boston accent. So good for us.
Next time.
All right, folks. Thanks again. Tune in next week. We'll have another great episode of the Device Talks Weekly podcast waiting for you.
Is that new?
Yeah, it's a Sonata. Let me pack it.
Oh, you're not fitting your car in there.
Chris, stop being a smarty pants, all right? Look who's got Smart Pack.